Okay, welcome to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. The hottest conservative talk radio in Canada, if not the world. Although there's some pretty stiff competition for that. Good evening, Chrissy. Um,
Well, that was fast.
yeah, hey, listen, you know what? She's always the first in here, and I think that's great. So, where was I? Oh,
I
yes.
clearly I
So,
threw you off. Clearly I
yes, you
threw you
did.
off.
No, it wasn't Chrissy. It was you.
It,
But he's
of course it
Joseph.
was
I'm
me.
Nick. He's in Ottawa. I'm not. You can join
Did you
the
just call
video
me
chat
Nick,
if
or
you'd like.
was that my imagination, or did you just call me Nick?
No, I think I got it right. He's
Okay, it
Joseph.
doesn't
I'm
matter.
Nick. You're in Ottawa. I'm not.
I don't know.
Anyway,
I'm just.
the video
It
chat.
was
If
a
you
very
want to
late
join
night
us,
for me last night. I'm still recovering from a very late night.
well, you've got quite the Herculean task in front of you. So by all means, if that's okay. We'll work around that. If
Okay.
you want to call or text the show, you can do that at 613-413-2217. And if you want to be part of the video chat, just click the link at blasterradio.com and you will appear like magic on your monitor, and you'll see Joseph and I, and we'll all be able to interact. And we're really looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. So if you want to join us that way, by all means, you go right ahead. We are certainly warm, welcoming, kind, cuddly teddy bears, and we don't bite much. And when we do, we've had most of our shots. Some of us more shots than others. Anyway, I wanted to jump in this today with I did a couple of things on Facebook this week that when well, there's two topics. So let me start with this one. There was a meme put up. It was today, and I'm not going after the person who put the meme up. It's that this is a prevalent attitude, and what the gentleman who posted this says is this is a reminder that your kids should leave home at 18. That mentality is a psyop by the central banks to make 10 extended family members pay 10 rents, mortgages, 10 sets of utilities, 10 car payments, and 10 of every item needed for home, plus entertainment and stress relief to cope with being alone. All right, no, 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 no. So I wrote a monologue, if you will. I'm not going to read it, the whole thing now. You can go on Facebook and read it there. But there's so much wrong with this. That's not what, like, how do I put this? If your kids, I think, as soon as they're capable, once they're beyond the age of 18, should leave home. Not for any nefarious reason, but just so they can begin to make their mark in the world, go out and begin the process of really maturing and finding out that life is not, hey, mom, can you make my bed and do my laundry? Or, hey, dad, do you mind if I borrow the car? Those kind of things are simply part of growing up and accepting the responsibility and the consequences of the financial and personal and social decisions you make as an adult. And you can't do that if you're buried in your parents' basement playing video games at 35 with no social skills. Okay, so I just, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I said, and I've got a real mixed bag of responses to that. But from my perspective, as a guy who's seen 8 kids go out the door, it has been, you know, at a it gets to a point when you have them at home. Yeah, I tease them a lot and stuff like that, but you kind of want them to go and start their own lives. Like when I was 18, I joined the Navy. I went 1,500 miles and left home, and that was it. I never went back. Now, if parents end up in a situation with a child who is, for no reasons, no issues of their own, um, or no fault of their own, in situations that they are, need some help, be it financially or come home for a while or kind of get their feet back underneath them before they go back out. All right. For the first 4 or 5 years after they leave the excuse me, nest, then you have that. I think that's completely legitimate. But once you get beyond 25, 26, you're done going home. You need to start to figure things out, grow up, and accept the world for what it is. And it's not all the lifestyle that your parents have. You have to earn that. And that's one of the biggest lessons and the biggest ways to teach that is to step out at 18 or 19 or 20 and say, guess what? I'm on my own. I have to make my own decisions. I can draw on my parents for counsel and advice, but basically, I'm my own man and I need to go out and make my own mark in the world. And in our case, and I'm sure it's the same with you, Joseph, and with a lot of parents, their kids do just fine. You know, they go out, they make their mistakes. We all do, but it's not fatal. Remember something, when you're 18 and you make a bad financial decision, you've got decades to fix it. When you're 60, it's not so much. You don't have that kind of time. So I just thought I'd kick it off with that and see what people have to say about that because I just don't understand this mentality that where this comes from. This is some kind of conspiracy. No, we've been doing this for thousands of years. You know, even in the Bible, it says a man shall leave his parents and a woman will leave her home and the two will become one and get married and start their own families. That's just the way the world has worked for 10,000 years or more in some fashion or another. Maybe not exactly like that, but close enough. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for you, Joseph. So let's see what you have to say about it.
Well, I think that you're confusing a couple of things. Um, I don't disagree with the main thrust of what you're saying. Um, that is that, at 18, 19, 20 years old, you should be out doing something outside of the home, not playing video games in the basement. But hey, the truth is at 14 or 15 years old, you shouldn't be spending all of your time playing video games in the basement either.
Yeah, I won't
So,
argue that.
so that is a problem. Um, is it a question of leaving home? Well, okay, so let's say you leave home and you don't have a job and you're still addicted to the video games. So instead of being in your parents' basement, what are you doing? You're often subsidized housing somewhere, sitting around playing video games all day, collecting a welfare check. And that's not most people who are on welfare are not like that, but it's not so much a question of leaving home. It's a question of what are you doing with your life, and you could be having a constructive life, and for whatever reason, still sharing a family home, and that was not uncommon. It was not entirely uncommon in the past for extended families to continue to share a home. Now, if you had a family with two or three boys or two or three girls, clearly not all of the children stayed in the family home, but it was not unusual for one of them to stay in the family home, and in some cases even to be married and have their own children. And I know people are going to laugh at me when I use this as an example because it's purely entertainment. But if you go back and look at the television series The Waltons, where you had
Right.
the grandparents, and then you had the parents, and you had their children, so you had three generations sharing the same home. Of course, the house was big enough to do that, and the father, not the grandfather, but the father in that series, I think was an only child. So there was certainly no competition between siblings over who would take over the family home eventually. But I'm just saying that I think that we have to be careful about creating this blanket rule, social rule, if you will, that says that when you hit 18 years old, you should be out of the house. I'm not. I think it's fine to be out of the house at 18. I was out of the house at 17 years old, and didn't go back. But the that doesn't mean that if I was gainfully employed and able to contribute as an adult to the household expenses and chores and what have you, then why not? I don't see the compelling need to kick
I
somebody out of
think,
the house
to be fair though,
at 18.
Joseph, if I could jump in here, to be fair, times, and I know this is an old saw, because times are always different. But
Sure.
in those days, going back to the 19, I think that Walton's was set in the 1930s, maybe during the Depression or maybe before that.
I know the 30s and into the 40s.
Okay, fine. So I was close, but there was a different culture. There was a different mentality. Um, Today, what we have are, because that was a big family. Okay, now I'm used to big families. I have one, and we had one child come home for a couple of years after going out and learning their occupation, their trade, because of just the way things were. So I'm not saying that should never happen. I'm speaking in a more general society wide sense that there is this mentality that says, I'll just live off mom and dad. As Murray was saying, from and hello, if you're out in Saskatchewan, Murray, hello and welcome to the show, because I think that's the first time we've heard from Murray. He says lots of high paying jobs in Saskatchewan still can't get people to work. And we talked about this, if not last week, the week before, about why we have this job deficit, where it's so hard to find people to work. And I don't want to go down and rehash that whole thing, but the bottom line is it's too easy to stay home because mom and dad provide, because most of them have one, maybe two kids, and they have a lot of this helicopter mentality where they want to hover over their children and make sure everything's perfectly safe for them before they leave the nest. And that's a hard thing to break. Number two, you have way too many ways for people to make money without actually producing anything. You buy and sell money on the internet. Okay, you can make some money doing that, but you don't create anything of value, right? And I don't have the opportunity to ask Murray this, but I'll bet you a lot of those jobs are in the blue trades. In other words, high backhoe operators, plumbers, electricians, carpenters. Um, and yeah, Mark, you're right. We do have this same problem. This is across the country. This is not unique to any one area. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that with the way society is today, we're setting our kids up for failure, because if we don't at least encourage them to go, and if look, you're right. If they go out and they get a job and they contribute to the family and they're taking part in doing their part in chores, then fine. But sooner or later, you got to go and set up your own little castle. You have to, step out into the world full fledged and say, here I am. This is what I'm all about. And you can't do that from the basement of your mom and dad's apartment, or, in an apartment in the basement of your mom and dad's place. Certainly not in the long term. Short term, that's a different animal, but long term, no, you got to get out there.
Yeah, well, again, I don't entirely disagree with you. In fact, as generally speaking, I do agree with you. But I think that there are two issues that we're discussing here, and that is, first of all, what's an appropriate time for somebody to leave the home and be completely on their own? Number one, and number two, if you are at home, irrespective of how old you are, if you're not a child, you're 15, 16 years old, you're not a kid anymore. So what are you doing to contribute to the household? And what are you doing to, make something of yourself? And whether you're living at home or not, to me, that's the bigger issue. Look, if you're living at home into your mid 20s or whatever, but you've gone to school, you've got a good job, you're maybe contributing to the household expenses. Maybe you have a basement apartment and you're paying some rent. You're helping to cover the cost of groceries. You're being basically a responsible adult, although albeit not, out on your own in your own separate apartment and that. And again, so I say, yeah, I agree with you that the norm is for somebody to grow up, get out, get out and be independent on their own. But I don't share with you sort of the blanket statement that the problem is being at home. For me, the problem is, what are you doing when you're at home? Are you wasting all of your time in the basement surfing on the internet or something like that? So to me, that's the bigger issue. But the other thing to remember is this, okay? When you're 16, 17, 18 years old, so let's say you hit 18 years old and that's it, mom and dad say, that's it, hit the road, Jack, come back and visit us every now and then. Don't forget to call. Um, you know, Great, that sounds like a good thing, except what if they don't have the skills or the wherewithal to make it on their own? Well, but here's the thing, okay? The thing is that we as a society, through our myriad plethora of government programming, um, the government steps in and takes on the responsibility or the role of parents in a
Yeah.
case like this. So you can get housing, you can get cash allowances. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a lot. In fact, it's very little. It's almost subsistence level, if not even just a little bit less than that. So you know, but you can survive if your life is all about sitting in front of your computer and playing video games all day. You can survive that. You can spend the rest of your life doing that, and be comfortable in the knowledge that the government, society, the community, using the government as its agent, is not going to let you starve. Now, before we go further here, let me just make a quick observation about homelessness, okay, and people living on the street. Generally speaking, people who are homeless have some psychological or mental issues. Again, not 100% across the board, but and I know I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but that's really the problem in most cases of homelessness. Is we're not talking about people that just can't afford to have a home. We're talking about people who just can't have a home because they're not capable of having a home, and it's unfortunate that we don't provide more resources to help those people. And it used to be, of course, that um, we would institutionalize people, and but that stopped a number of years ago. There were a number of court decisions around it, and so you can't institutionalize somebody against their will unless they're demonstrably a danger to themselves or society. So I know it's off on a tangent a little bit, but I think that it's sort of related to the topic. So I just want to make clear that I'm not, when you kick somebody out of your house, that doesn't mean that they're automatically on the street. And if they're smart and they're kicked out of the house, they're going off and talking to the local social services agency, and getting some sort of support from them, and that support is readily available out there.
It is. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but my whole point is the ethos around our culture is one that is far too cradling and protective. Like, you
Yeah,
got to take your lumps, and you don't do that in the basement because, and again, I realize I'm painting with a broad brush, and I'm trying to be a little more general than specific in my in my analysis of the situation. But the bottom line, I still think that the best thing that can happen, and I'm not saying that the year 18 years is a hard line. We've had kids stay with us longer than that at home, uh, and they left when they were ready. When they made the decision to leave, because let's face it, complacency. What's that? What's the term? Complacency or something uh, generates contempt, not complacency.
familiarity.
Thank you. Familiarity breeds contempt. In other words, if you've been there too long and you feel like you're trapped, you'll want to go. And I'm not saying parents do that, but children feel that way because these rules they have to live under are not of their own making. So if
Sure.
you say, "Look, you got to be back in the house by 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night," unless you tell us, especially as they get older, unless you tell us, where you are, and we just want to know that you're safe. If you need any help, let us. And it grates on them because they still feel like they're not accepted fully as adults. So the only way to do that uh, is time to step out. And like my son, my oldest son, when he hit 18, he was gone. Now he's 36 and is doing really well. But he told me later one of the reasons I left was because I absolutely hated rolling round bales out for those horses. I had no interest in the horses. I didn't want anything to do with the horses because, for those who don't know, we spent a lot of years with a lot of horses, and the kids were all expected to help out taking care of them. And he always got up and did it when he was asked to, but inside he hated it. And it got to a point where he said, "That's it, I'm done." And he stepped out on his own. And he's been very successful ever since. And I know that there's millions of other kids out there who do exactly the same thing. So I'm trying to be careful with the way I couch this, because I don't want people to think, first of all, that A, I was cruel to my kids, or B, that I don't understand that there's some circumstances that say that 18, they're not ready, and they know they're not ready, and their parents know they're not ready. So if they stay for another few years, okay, fine. But at some point, you have to, the old analogy about the mother bird kicking the little fledglings out of the nest has to become a reality. And at some point, these young people have to step up and accept their place in the world. And the best way to do that, maybe I should rephrase it. The best thing you can do for them is help them do that.
Yeah, one other thing that I think an important point to make here, and I think that this contributes to a lot of the frustration that's out there, is I think that there's some unreasonably high expectations as to where you're going to go from your parents' home when you first get out on your own. And I'm sorry, I don't recall who posted the comment, but I was just reading about rents for a one-bedroom apartment being $1,600 or $1,800 or sorry, over $1,000 for a one-bedroom. Sorry, a one-bedroom is what is that? $1,800.
$1,000 one bed is 1,800. Two
Right.
bedrooms.
I'm not sure what market that's in. But yeah, listen, you get out on your own, and you're looking for your first place to live, and you can't afford an $1,800
Here's another
apartment.
thing.
I understand that, but just to finish the thought, Nick, that's a relatively new thing. We went through a period of time where people got out and they could afford things, and they were starting out in their lives, and they started out at a certain place in the ladder that historically young people didn't start out that way. And so and not just young people, but bachelors, for instance, sharing apartments was not unusual. And again, a great example, I mean, I know I'm being a little facetious here by going to some television shows or some films or whatever, but if you recall Miracle on 34th Street, the original Miracle on 34th Street with Judy Garland, I think it was
Oh my
Judy
God,
Garland.
that was in '38, was it not?
Uh, no,
It was
no,
black and
no.
white.
It was after the war.
Was it?
But the point is that Chris Kringle is sharing an apartment. There's these guys. Here's a successful lawyer, and Chris Kringle, who turns out to be Santa Claus. Okay, and they're sharing a one-bedroom apartment. They have two twin beds set up in the bedroom, and and they go to bed at night and they talk to one another before they turn the lights off. The point I'm making here is that you have to be in the circumstances. I think you have to be prepared to be a little bit more flexible with your expectations. And
To that
so
point,
rooming houses used to be common, and shared apartments, but rooming houses were a very big thing for a period of time
yeah,
as well,
yeah.
in the bigger cities. So now, I do want to make one comment about rooming houses, and that is, and also just rental units. and that is, to a degree, what we've ended up doing is we've ended up with so much regulatory oversight, so much red tape in both in development, and so many features that are required by law, that it basically it ends up to in a situation where you can't even start a rooming house without almost pricing yourself out of the market. I have
Yeah.
friends that have done this, and we have to have certain types of doors have to be installed.
Yep.
We have to have certain, you have a rooming house, you have a house that you convert to rooms. You want to rent your rooms, okay? And if you're doing it legally, well, for goodness sakes, I have to have an exit sign posted above the door to the exit or the outside, right?
Yep.
As if nobody knows where the exit is. Just little things like that
Yep.
that add to the cost,
Well, this
and
is the
also
government
undermine
interference.
the desire to develop these kinds of lower rental homes. So
Well,
there's an element of government creating a situation, and on top of that, I think that many people's expectations, are perhaps a little bit higher when they're starting out than they ought to be.
Well, here's a couple of things. First of all, one of the reasons why there are all these regulations, like look at the aviation industry. Every crash brings new regulations because they want to make flying safer. They want to make these, obviously, in the past, there's been problems with, and I'm not saying boarding houses are a bad idea. I'm just saying this is why this mess comes along. The government says that's not safe, therefore we must. And you have to put exit signs in, fire extinguishers. Not that these things in and of themselves are bad, but that's just a reality. And over time, the regulations build up to the point it becomes unfeasible. Now, I wanted to mention just before we go to break that Murray makes a great point, and this is something that is hard to get kids to understand. And by kids, I mean anybody under 30, okay? Because they don't, it doesn't compute. You go where the work is. Murray said the following: people have to get out of Ontario and move to the prairies for opportunities and lower cost of living, for rent, and a better chance of buying a house. And in his next post, he says you can get a 3-bedroom home here for $1,500 a month. Okay, so you know what? He's right. That used to be the way people did it. You would migrate to where the work is. That's what all these people during the Depression were riding trains across the country looking for work. They didn't stay in their location and go, "Oh, I can't find a job," at 25 or 26 years old. They actually were hobos. They got on a train, went across the country, and would jump off at a town, look for work. If there's none, they get back on, and away they went. And the risks they took and the danger they put themselves in, all that fed into the kind of fiber and the culture that carried us through World War II, along with a lot of other factors. But you have to be able to at least psychologically toughen yourself to the point where you say, you know what, mom and dad, there's no work here. The same thing in Newfoundland with the collapse of the cod fishery. Okay, the same thing happened there. They had to look at what their short to medium to long term prospects were in a particular geographic area. And if they didn't see a future, they had to leave. That's why Newfies built Toronto, because the cod fishery collapsed. And now the whole East Coast, or the province of Newfoundland, moved to Toronto, built everything from the CN Tower to the Sky Dome. Now, to carry that out west, what's wrong with somebody who's 20, 21, 22 years old today going to Saskatchewan looking for work in either, and I know oil refineries and all that stuff, there's a lot of hassle with that, but they're still out there. There's still work to be done, or becoming a hand on a farm. I know a guy who just left Pickle Lake and went all the way to Alberta to work on a farm. Now, he's running a small business at the same time. He roasts coffee and makes lead-headed jigs for fishing and so on, but he's working on a farm. He and his wife just picked up and boom, away they went. There's a lot more of the story I won't go into, but now he's in Alberta because he went to where the work he wanted to do was. He didn't stay in his area. And that's something it's very difficult to get young people to understand. Sometimes You have to follow the work. And sometimes you have to look at the clock and say, you're out of time. We need to take a break. We'll be right back with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Glad you're still with us.
That was pretty exciting music.
Yeah. Hey, listen.
That was some of the old music from the show.
Yeah.
The podcast.
You know something? This show gets better every week. It really does. And a lot of that credit goes to our producer, John. I can't thank him enough for the work he's doing behind the scenes. I do want to make a comment just quickly. Chrissy says, I almost accepted a job at Sioux Lookout Resort, but ended up in Muskoka. Go where the work is. Well, you know what? We're Muskoka of the North. Anyway, just before, I want to mention to the people.
That's quite a separation between Muskoka and Sioux Lookout, but that's great.
Well, it depends on how you go. By plane, it's not so bad. Anyway, I want to reassure the people in the chat room. We are reading your comments. Sometimes we can't comment on them, and we can't comment directly in this setup, but we try to include the comments when we can in the course of conversation. But please don't keep posting. We're reading. We find them interesting and fascinating. Yeah, that is a good commercial, I must admit. So we will include them to the best of our abilities. Now, let's see. Now I got thinking about biplanes again. I'm gonna have to stop in to see that guy when I get back down there for my son's wedding. One of the things I wanted to throw at you, Joseph, is we have a situation. I'm going back to federal politics on the international scale, and there's a story from CBC of all places, and the headline is this: a year after the Taliban takeover, advisors still pleading for help to bring families to Canada from Afghanistan. And the nub of the story is there are advisors, people who work with the Canadian military, spying on the Taliban, intercepting transmissions, and just doing what we would have called
intelligence work.
What's that? Intelligence work. Yeah, same kind of, the underground work is the word I was looking for. During World War II, or any war really, these people took huge risks because they weren't only risking. It's like one thing if a soldier goes, 5,000 or 6,000 miles from home and goes into combat, he's risking his own life, right? But if he gets captured or killed, the chances of them going after his family, because he's so far from home, are dramatically reduced. But in this case, these people took the chance, and they know something. They know that if they get caught, then not only are they going to suffer, but their families are going to be persecuted. And for over a year now, there are about 45 or 50 people over there pleading with the Canadian government to get them out. And they're living in caves. They're hiding from the Taliban. The Taliban are terrorizing their family, torturing people. One guy even was an 80-year-old man was killed during torture because his son was involved with the Canadian military, giving them intelligence about how to best fight back against the Taliban. So, you have this situation. I think we owe these people a huge debt, and we never should have left them behind in the first place, or their families. If we're going to allow people to walk into this country over our land bridges and, fly in here from every corner of the planet without any question, and, put them up in hotels and do all this stuff, whether it be Roxham Road or whether it be across some western border, who knows? Who cares how they get here? Those people are welcomed with open arms. But the people who took their own lives and the lives of their family in their own hands to help make sure that the Canadian military got the information it needed to be as successful as they were. And make no mistake, we were one of the most successful military forces during the War of Afghanistan in the whole theater. The Americans and the Dutch and the British, yeah, all great, but nobody punched above their weight like we did. And we turn around and leave these people behind who were a big part of that. This is, to me, it's disgraceful. It's disgusting. This should never have entered into the conversation. That should have been automatic. And yet here they are a year later, and they're still hiding in fear of their lives and the lives of their families.
Yeah, well, there's no question that if you were providing assistance to the Canadian forces, or really any of the Western allies, and as a consequence of that, that you find that your lives are in danger, or the lives of your family members, then there's no question that these people ought to have been allowed to come to Canada. Certainly, even if you're just referring to the people who collaborated with Canadian personnel.
Right.
So you're absolutely right, Nick, and it's quite tragic that we've left people behind, and this is contrary to our ethos, if you will, the military ethos, of not leaving people behind, and I don't really know. I mean, I know what the solution is, but unfortunately, we have a government in place that doesn't care, and they have their own things, their own priorities. You know, uh, Banning the use of nitrogen-based fertilizers
Yeah.
is
Talk about disordered priorities.
is a high priority for these guys, irrespective of what it does to the world food supply. But come hell or high water, we're going to create and enforce this ban. 50 Afghanis and their families who are endangered or living in hiding because they happen to collaborate with the country, the forces of the country that came over to free them. Okay, largely, it's appalling, and I just can't think of anything more to say than that. And if we had another government, even if we had a different prime minister and cabinet with the same governing party, I would certainly hope that they would have the courage and the character to change this situation and go over there and get these people out. And I'm not, by the way, let me be clear. I'm not oblivious to the complexity of going over and getting people out. That in itself is going to require some planning, some thought, and I would even say some danger. But I think that these people have earned the right to expect that they're not going to be left behind as they have been. Unfortunately, I just don't see that happening, and it's terrible. It's sad.
The
It's
thing that
criminal.
makes this even worse is the American bailout or pullout of Afghanistan. It was a complete disaster. They left $9 billion of military hardware behind. They'll have thousands of people, just like the ones who helped the Canadians, because the Americans had a larger force in Afghanistan than we did. That's what goes without saying. But the whole thing is, this is, even if you thought that uh, yeah. Stop it, Murray. I'm trying to be serious. But even if we thought it was a good idea to go get them before, it certainly is after that. In January, when they pulled that last contingent out of Afghanistan, and by them I mean the Americans, it made life infinitely worse for everybody, because now there's nothing stopping the Taliban. The American military is gone. The Canadian military is gone. All those kind of things are gone, and the Taliban are running roughshod over anybody who they even think might have in some way helped the people who they were fighting against while we were there in Afghanistan. I mean, you have to ask yourself the question: what do we go over there for if we're going to leave those kinds of people behind? Because you're right, we were there and ostensibly liberate them from
Well,
13th century oppressive, horrific system of government, and
well,
we turned our back on them.
yeah. Well, in fairness, Nick, the original mission was not really to liberate per se the Afghan people who were living under the thumb of the Taliban. The reason that we originally went into Afghanistan was because uh, of
9/11.
as a result of 9/11,
Yeah.
we knew that a lot of the infrastructure, the training, etc., of terrorists was happening in Afghanistan, and so the idea was that we wanted to extirpate this cancer in Afghanistan, and in order to do that, we had to overthrow the existing Taliban government and install a new um, democratic government, or at least a government that would foster democracy in Afghanistan. So but there was a lot of mission creep. Okay, so all of a sudden, from a mission, an anti-terrorist mission, essentially, uh, it evolved into create a free society mission, which is one of the reasons why we and our allies ended up staying in Afghanistan for as long as they did.
What was it, 10, 11
So,
years?
well, for us it was that, but for the Americans, for instance, I was
Almost
20
20.
years,
Yeah.
and so, but even if that originally wasn't the mission, the fact is that that's what happened. Okay.
Yeah.
And once that happened, once that the mission evolved into this, rightly or wrongly, then we had to assume certain responsibilities for encouraging. And remember this, okay? This was not a question of people coming and begging to help. Okay, I mean, sure, they were volunteers, etc. But we were encouraging people to do this kind of thing. We
Which
were
makes it even
encouraging
more important
people.
that we get them out.
Yeah, so it's you tell people that you want them to participate and to be good democratic citizens, and to take leadership roles in encouraging and developing a free and democratic society, and some of these people are going, well, I don't know, I think that's a little risky, and we're telling them, don't worry, we have your back. But in the end, it turns out that we didn't have their back, and I think it's shameful, and it's not just Canada, it's all of the allies,
Yeah.
and you know what does that in the end? What is the message that sends to potential friends and allies around the world who look at the example of Afghanistan and they say, we can't trust them. We can't trust the West. And so, in a very real sense, you end up shooting yourself in the foot.
Well, the thing that really galls me about this, because I just looked at the article again, and it is 45, uh, the number that we would have to go back for. We have an organization who is specifically trained for this exact mission. It's called JTF2. This is what they specialize in. So, yes, there's a certain risk involved. But look, when you put on the uniform, you accept that risk. So these guys, JTF2, this is right up there, right in their wheelhouse. We could send over, do whatever we have to do, put JTF on the ground, have them round up those 45. And I'm making a very complicated mission sound very simple. And I don't mean to do that. But just for the sake of discussion, you send over JTF2, you round them up, and you get them out. If the JTF2, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a shot of a bunch of prisoners being led off the back of a C-130 in Afghanistan. And some of the soldiers who were escorting them off all had long beards, and nobody knew who they were. And it was only found out later that was JTF2. They were attributed as Americans, but they weren't. They were Canadians. It's one of the most elite forces in the world. And if they can't do it, nobody can. But I think this is a time when you tap them on the shoulder and say, guys, this is what you're trained for. Here's the mission. Go get them. And that would be the proper response, even at this late date, and it'll never happen. That's what really is outrageous about it. We have the technology, we have the personnel, the weapons, and the systems, everything in place to go and do this. We, Canada, right here, right now, could do this, and our leadership won't. They just don't have the guts for it, or they're not interested.
I don't know what it is. You raise a very important question. What is the reason to not do this? We're not talking again. It's not an easy mission. It's not a simple mission. It's complex.
Yep.
It involves a certain amount of risk, but it's not an expensive mission, relatively speaking. And in terms of risk, we're not talking about sending in a company or a regiment or a battalion. We're really talking a small group of people,
20, 30 guys.
I'm at a loss as to understand why we're not doing something. What is the reason? And I don't know. I can't fathom why we're not doing what we need to do here to get these people out. I mean, it comes down to this, okay? It's so fundamental, Nick. Just do the right thing. Just do the right thing. It's not expensive. It's not going to disrupt.
Well, you know what?
No, I mean, so what if the mission goes sideways? What are the diplomatic repercussions? I mean, they're virtually non-existent. We're talking about
it's not like we have an embassy to the Taliban in Ottawa.
What are they? What are they going to throw? We don't even have an embassy in Afghanistan.
That's my point.
And even if we did, so they tell us to close the embassy. They kick our diplomats out. It's Afghanistan. No disrespect intended, but let's face reality, okay? So okay, I can't fathom what the downside here is.
First of all, let me go back to what Mark Philippe said. And there's a question built into that answer. They are not interested. Okay, why aren't they interested? That's one of the things I can't understand. And Murray, with all due respect, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that we have the choppers necessary and the way to get them there so that we could use our own equipment. We have everything we need. We have the heavy lift aircraft. We have the twin Hueys. We have the people who are trained to do this. We could make this an all-Canadian operation and can pull it off. If anybody can pull it off, we can. And it's what's so outrageous to me as a former member, and now I was never in JTF2. I was just a killick in the Navy. But as a former member of the military, I have some sense of what they're capable of. I've been watching the military for 30 years, 40 years now. And believe me, if anybody can do this, we can. We've got the best snipers in the world. We've got the best special services in the world.
Yeah.
We've got the best helicopter pilots. You name it. Everything we need, we have. And we're
Yeah.
not using them. And
And
that is what so angers me so deeply about this.
yeah, and I think it's important also to point out, Nick, that when people think of a special ops mission, they automatically think about the special helicopters and
Oh yeah, the black.
high altitude parachute jumps, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, sort of the high tech mission. But the truth is, a lot of this stuff is pretty low tech.
Yeah, it's
And
boots on the ground. Just
you actually don't have to have all of this sophisticated, expensive, elaborate equipment to perform a mission like this. Doing it high tech is one way of performing the mission. Doing it low tech is perhaps even a better way of performing this mission, and increasing the likelihood of its success, because the high tech stuff tends to attract a lot more attention.
true enough.
But it's sexy. You know what I'm saying? It's
Well,
it's what you see in the movies and stuff like that.
but see, the
Um,
point I'm trying to make is we have both options.
yeah,
We can do both. We like these guys are trained like unlike any other soldier in the world. And these guys, there's only about 300 or 400 of them in the first place, which is why they can train them to such a high level. But let's set the military aside, because Chrissy made a good point. Can't imagine the families what they're going through, who have no doubt tried to speak out and get their loved ones back. Yes, they did speak out. The CBC actually carried it, which is surprising to me. Anyway, the point is that this, as you pointed out, is the right thing to do, and that's the only reason we need. It's the only thing we have to do is to keep our conscience clear. Even if the worst possible case scenario happens, that every one of the people we send in there to do the right thing comes home in a body bag, as tragic as that would be, it's still the right thing to do, because that's what they're there for. They know that when they join. They know that when they try to get into this elite force. They know there's a very good chance that on one of these missions, they're not coming home. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of this kind of ancillary warfare. It's basically guerrilla warfare with night scopes and infrared glasses. So these kind of things, they accept those risks. So why are we going to have this military? It's like the Victoria Cross. If we don't ever award it, why do we have it? Same thing with these guys. If we don't ever employ them, and they get employed a lot, I'm not saying that they don't. They go to places and you never hear about it. There's a saying around Petawawa that says, if you don't know, don't worry about your JTF2. If you want to know where they went, look where our 427 squadron's deploying, and you'll know where the JTF2 went. And that's no big, I'm not giving away anything there. That's very common. Excuse me. So, we have them. Let's use them. Let's do the right thing. The tragedy is we have a government that simply couldn't care less because it doesn't advance their liberal agenda.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I think to remember, Nick, is it's not, it's a little easy for us to throw stones at the government and say the government doesn't. And ultimately, you're right. That's where the buck stops. But on this and so many other fundamental issues, you have to ask yourself, why are not Canadians themselves sufficiently up in arms about this that they're going to exert some political pressure on
Let
the
me ask you a
government
question. That's a good point. Let me
in
ask you a
order
question
to?
about that.
And I just think that people don't care.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's it at all. I think that this is the first time in a year that I've seen this story printed anywhere. Yet how many times have we seen stories about the environment, about, transgender, CRT, what's going on in the States? They flood our newspapers. This story is far more important than any of that stuff. And one story that I know of in a year, that's why people don't care. They don't know. They don't know. Look, I'm sorry, Joseph, but I cannot believe that if you walked out your door and stopped 10 people and told them about this, they all go, yeah, who cares? Some would, but I'll bet you the majority of them go, what? Are you serious?
Yeah. Well, my cynicism is showing through a little bit here,
I think so.
I guess. And what I would say is that if you confront them, they'll say, they'll have very strong opinions about it, but in the end, they won't. Those strong opinions won't motivate them to actually take action that, in the end, will motivate the government. So it's perhaps not entirely accurate to say they don't care. Of course, when you put the situation in front of them, they likely will care, but they won't care enough to get off their backsides and do something about it. And that's a problem with our democracy and with Western democracies overall, is that there are so many things that people know there are wrong about how governments are doing, or what governments are doing, but they're just, if you corner them and you ask them, they'll tell you, yeah, you're right, this is wrong, the government shouldn't be doing this. But that never seems to motivate them to actually do anything. And it's a phenomenon that I don't know what the reason for it is, and I don't know what you actually can do to counter it.
There is a short answer to this, and I'm looking at the clock because we have to take our break, but it's called outrage overload. There are so many things to be outraged about that people have just burned out as far as being outraged, and the list of examples of that. But this to me is something you need to rekindle that outrage and get off your butt and get on the phone and tell your Liberal MP that you will not vote for them unless they deal with this.
I don't disagree with you, Nick.
All right. Well, with that, we have to take a break, folks. We're going to take a couple minutes, go refill your beverage of choice glasses, and hit the bathroom if you have to. We'll be back right after this on the Nick and Joe Show. We'll be right back.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's national capital region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
7,000 deaths. All right. I was just looking at my cue card to figure out where we're going next.
Nick, before we go anywhere,
Yeah.
I saw one of the comments flash across the screen, a question about where we broadcast on, and John, our producer, of course, answered the question on our behalf, saying, how you could catch the show live. All very true. But I just want to mention that, if you're listening to this on either live right now, or you're listening or watching this on a rebroadcast, John, our producer, was very kind and was able to update our episodes on our podcast. So, which is you can reach at the nickandjoeshow.com. So you can actually get an archive of our show as podcasts. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because you can also get those same podcasts on virtually any of the major podcast networks. So Apple, Google Podcasts,
Spotify,
Spreaker, Breezer, all of the major podcast networks. So, but if you want to just go to the nickandjoeshow.com, you can listen to and download any of our episodes, going right back to the beginning, more than 3 years ago now, Nick.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's true. I was just laughing when I read the comment John put up, the nickandjoeshow.com for past podcast episodes, also on Apple. I thought he printed Goofy and Spotify. I read it too quickly. Anyway, yeah,
Clearly.
You're right. There's lots of ways, and there's plenty of great content in those shows. So, because when is our third anniversary?
I think we've passed it. I don't. You know what? I don't know. I'm pretty sure now you've got me confused. I'm pretty sure we passed our third anniversary, but it would have been whatever. The anniversary of our show is in April, late March, early April, thereabouts. So, but we'll definitely look at it.
Well, we're going to have to make a big deal out of number 4, just because we're different that way. Most people do it in increments of 5.
We've had some fun on some of those shows.
Do you remember the old combat zone?
Yeah, because we started off as the combat zone. That was what we.
Do you remember what the opening saying was?
Yeah.
Where the only thing a liberal has to say is, "Take cover, run away." I forget what.
Run away, take cover, we surrender,
something, and I give up, or something like that.
And the funny thing was,
abandoned ship. It was abandoned ship, take cover, run away, and we surrender.
Yeah, and I recall that we couldn't. For the life of me, I could never remember those.
I know, and I
had to write them down. But we had some really great shows. Not all of them are as good as the others, and there were times when we had technical difficulties as well that sort of undermined the quality of the show.
That's one of the great things about having John working in the background, is that we don't have technical issues like we used to. I'm not saying we never do, but certainly not like we did. I remember whole shows. It was a disaster from beginning to end. And sometimes we just had to hang the headphones up for that night because it just wasn't going to work.
Yeah,
those days are behind us now.
The one show that stands out, and what I'll do is I'll go back in the archive and see what the episode was and the date, so that people, if they're interested, they can look it up. But we had such a great time when they legalized pot. Oh my God, that was a great show.
I remember that. It'd be fun is to do bloops and bloopers and miscues and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
That would be a lot of fun, just to poke some fun at ourselves. Because we don't poke fun at anybody else, but we sure as heck do poke fun at ourselves. Actually, we poke fun at pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's been a long history, and I remember going back to the very first time you and I ever met. I was still on terrestrial radio in Ottawa. Yes, John is a one-man CBC network. He certainly is. He doesn't have the budget CBC does.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
But other than that, but the very first time, I think it was either you were a guest on my show or you were part of a panel I was on. I can't remember.
It was probably a guest on your radio show.
Yeah, that's when I was still doing probably the Nick at Night show.
I don't
Good God, you realize how long ago that was?
Yeah.
It was 2013 when I was
And
Lisa La Flamme. Yes.
some of the material we covered on that show, Nick, when I was on it maybe, I don't know, half a dozen times over the years. But
Yeah.
do you remember? I have to say this, okay, because it's so timeless, the material. But when there was all of the debate about the same-sex curriculum in Ontario,
Right.
and changes to, sorry, not the same sex, but the sex education
Yes.
curriculum in Ontario. And everybody was obsessed with the sex education aspects of it.
Oh,
And,
I know where you're going.
and I said, the problem here is so what we did is we actually got a hold of the whole curriculum.
Yeah.
And didn't even talk about the sex ed stuff. We just went into the craziness about, teaching the mechanics of throwing a ball,
Right.
and how the lesson plan was broken down into the components of throwing. Like, first you hold the ball, then you launch it.
Don't forget. Now, jumping was fun. The one that really stands out was jumping. There's 3 components to jumping: takeoff, in flight, and landing. I mean, it was absolutely absurd. Kids are born knowing this stuff.
Okay, no, and then the best part was, I see we're redoing the show.
I know.
But the best part was when they were describing body types. And of course, you can't call a person fat or overweight or whatever. And by the way, I'm a big guy, so I'm overweight. So I'm not I get to make fun of overweight people because I'm one of them.
Right.
But it was like, okay, you can't do that. So they're going through all of the things you can't talk about when you're describing body image and that.
Right.
So what was the so what they were saying was that it's the type of body is round. You have a round body. You're not fat. You're not overweight. You're round.
You look like the Michelin tire man.
And I'm thinking, I'm going, man. There were certain things that you cannot be politically correct over. Okay, if a person's overweight, they're overweight.
That's easy.
Okay, but no, we can't. We have to be very sensitive to the language we're using. So we're going to call them round in our official document,
as if they wouldn't figure that out.
No, but as if I'm going to be offended that somebody says I'm overweight, am I going to be less offended if people call me round?
My God, we have done some amazing stuff. We've covered a lot of ground.
And just let me make this one final point, okay? That I can't help it. I got to make this observation, Nick, and that is that we're paying bureaucrats hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases, salary, to come up with this stuff.
Well, that's the part that just blows my mind. Is that, well, there's an old saying in Ottawa that says, "Do you know why a bureaucrat doesn't look out the window in the morning? Because it gives us something to do in the afternoon." And people laugh at that because you're well versed with Yes Minister.
Yes, that's television show.
I think it's the epitome of British humor. That and what's his name, Rowan Atkinson in Mr. Bean. Those two are, pleasantly plump. Yes, unbelievably funny. You got to understand the British mindset in order to really get it. But your remark when I was asking you about it, you were talking to bureaucrats in Parliament, in Parliament, and they all were big fans of the show, but they didn't know it was humorous. They thought it was a documentary.
Yeah, well, that was the thing was that when we talked to people about that show, and it's yes minister and then yes
Yes,
prime
Prime Minister.
minister, and you can look at clips of this on YouTube and
Oh
that.
my God.
Um,
Look
uh,
up Who Runs the Country.
it's the going joke was that people think it's people watch that and it's funny, and it is. It's a comedy, no question about it. But what they don't realize is how accurate it really is about how this stuff works
The guy who
in
works
Parliament.
with the minister, and I can't remember the characters' names, but you got the one who is the politician, and the next his advisor, his counsel, secretary, call him what you want, is the ultimate diplomat because he's always, striking the neutral ground, right? Just, oh my God, he wanted to. There was something about a hospital that they were debating one day, and he said, "Well, I'll put out a pronouncement supporting this." Oh, well, maybe you can do that, but maybe you might want to think about this. Before long, he had 180 degrees out of phase. And then when his minister came to the conclusion that was 180 degrees away from what he wanted, well, maybe you can do that, but consider, and then he flipped him right back around again. The guys, in other words, he took him by the philosophical nose and led him in a circle. And it was just absolutely hilarious how easy it was. Kind of like Mr. Bean giving himself his own dental work.
Yeah, and by the way, with respect to the character describing people as round,
Yes.
I saw the comment about being pleasantly plump.
Yeah, I saw it too.
And but the term that we used to use for bigger plus size guys like me was portly.
Portly, yes, that's
Portly.
right. I forgot. I thought you were going to say fat.
No. The polite way of referring to us was portly. You were a portly gentleman. So that's it.
Yeah,
I'm a portly gentleman.
that's right. And if you put a bowler hat on and a pipe, you're the epitome of a portly gentleman.
Yeah, I'm not into bowlers. I used to have a Homburg though. I don't know what happened to it. It's
Is that the one that kind of pulls down into a beak, but there's no, like, it's close to your head, like not like a cap, but it comes down like a duck's bill over your head?
no, that would be a news cap or something. I think they call it. I know what you're talking about,
Yeah,
but
I think they used them a lot when they were playing golf.
something like that.
What a waste of
And
time sport.
anyway, what we're doing here is we're moving away from our agenda,
We are.
and talking about whatever, as the saying goes, whatever enters our over fertile minds.
Yeah, somehow there are all kinds of things that do that, but I want to bring us back. I think you're right. The headline. This comes from Post Millennial. There's a headline there. It's actually put out by Canadian News. I just reposted it, and it's dated August 16th. In other words, yesterday. The headline reads this: over 10,000 drug deaths in BC since public health emergency declared. All right, let me read just a couple of paragraphs and to give the listener the tenor of what we're talking about, and they can go and look this up for themselves to get the whole story. In 2016, British Columbia declared a public health emergency in response to an alarming rise in deaths from drug overdose. In the years since, very little has changed, and over 10,000 people have lost their lives to illicit substance abuse. On Monday, officials held a press conference headlined by peer clinical advisor and former addict Guy Felicia. Felicella. Felicia. Okay. 6 years ago, nearly 1,000 people in the province died from illicit drug supply in a single year. Adding that today, the same number of people die in just half that time. One or two more paragraphs. According to preliminary data released by BC Coroner's Service on Tuesday, at least 1,095 people have died as a result of this substance abuse since January 2022, which Chief Coroner Lisa Lapointe said puts BC on track for a record loss of life yet again. Okay, so my point with this is an actual crisis. This is something we should be concerned about. Canadians are dying in large numbers because of fentanyl and other illicit drugs that are readily available on our streets. And the BC government has rightly declared this an emergency. I just don't see them doing anything about it. It's one thing to cry. It's like making a climate change, calling a climate emergency. Okay, fine. Now what? So you declared an emergency. What are you going to do about it? And there's no answer to that. There's no new clinics set up. There's no people going around picking drug addicts up off the streets and getting them into the help they need. All they've done is provide shooting galleries where they can poison themselves under the supervision of a nurse. That to me is not a solution. That's like giving an alcoholic a clean glass. And I can't help but think, Joseph, when I read this, that it's funny how COVID, as much as I hate even today talking about it, gets 10 times, 15, 20 times the attention with nowhere near the number of fatalities in this province that this drug addiction does. So on one hand, they're declaring an emergency. On the other hand, they're not doing anything to solve the problem. They're only making it worse. And God help you if you come out and say, COVID's not really as big a deal as we think it is. Yeah, there's people who have died from it, and that's tragic, but people die from a lot of things. And we need to focus on what actually matters, where people are dying in large numbers, and we can do something about it concretely now, not 80 years from now, or not, by putting a mask on, that kind of stuff. So,
Well,
it's frustrating to read.
Sure, and it's tragic, and of course the problem is, what can you do about it? I mean, the government has pretty much painted itself into a corner by basically saying on certain soft drugs, particularly marijuana, and cannabis products. Not only are we going to legalize it, but we're going to make money off of it as well. So it's and the sort of liberal libertarian ethos that dominates our public policy debates these days makes it very difficult for anybody to come forward and say, maybe we should be enforcing the laws more strictly. Maybe we should have more strict drug laws, and maybe we should be enforcing them more strictly. Look, I don't know what the solution here is. I will say this: I'm very much opposed to safe injection sites. As I've said in the past, when your daughter or your son comes knocking on your door after having been away for however long, and they have a drug problem, and they're looking for help, what you want to do is you want to put them in the car and drive them to the local rehab center,
right?
If you can find one, and that's a problem. Okay, that we don't actually invest any kind of real funds in addiction treatment. What you don't do is you don't say, no problem, I'll just drive you to the local safe injection site, or so-called safe injection site. So the problem is that's our whole approach to addiction is to be non-judgmental, and I get that. And I don't want to sound too critical of being non-judgmental because it's an addiction, okay? And yes, it's true that at some point in time you had to make the choice to take the pills or to put the needle in your arm while you were still clean and sober. So there is a certain amount of personal responsibility, but irrespective of that, we're talking about addictions. And the very nature of an addiction is that it's difficult, if not impossible, for you to control the addiction. And so you need treatment. But we're not investing in treatment facilities. We basically we say, look, we don't want to we don't want to we don't want to punish you. We don't want to be judgmental. We don't want to do any of this stuff. So go ahead and do what you want, and we'll figure out, try to find ways to minimize the risk, but help you get off of it. I don't know. It's a very low priority, and
You know,
I think it's really unfortunate. I think that every dollar that's spent on needle exchanges and safe injection sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
it's wasted
and
money.
related programs ought to be invested, or rather than invested in those things, they should be invested
Well,
in
look,
treatment facilities.
let's take two files, okay? Climate change and COVID. And if we pulled just a few $1 billion out of that, we could beat this problem. What it takes is somebody like a Ron DeSantis, a Canadian Ron DeSantis, Premier of BC, Premier of Ontario, Premier of whatever province you want to pick. I don't care. To stand up and say, obviously, what we're doing doesn't work. So we are going to pull some of the funds away from these other files, and we're going to put them where they matter, because this is concrete. This is happening right now. This is real. These people are actually dying, and they don't need to. Use some of the COVID language if you want to. I don't care. But you have to open up clinics. You have to make more beds available for treatment, and you have to do it right now. Otherwise, more people will poison themselves. This isn't, this isn't climate change that's going to affect us maybe 80 years if the earth hasn't burned up in the next 8. I think is what we're down to now, is about 8 years before Prince Charles's prediction of, we're all going to be, it'll be too late. I don't believe that. So just take some of that money and look at how much money right there in the city of Ottawa is being spent on climate change in the next, between now and 2030. $60 billion. Why don't somebody ask the mayor or whoever the next mayor is, because this mayor couldn't care less. Just say, how many how many treatment clinics could you set up for $60 billion? How
Yeah,
about 30?
yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is, that $60 billion or whatever. By the way, I think it's supposed to be up until 2050, not 2030, but it's
Okay,
still a
fine.
huge chunk of money. But
Yep.
the reality is, it's a pipe dream. It's a fantasy, like a Harry Potter novel. It's never going to happen. There isn't enough money in the city of Ottawa. Taxes people are already paying enough tax. So they're not going to see they're not going to not rebel if their property taxes increase by 50 to 100% in order to generate the revenue in order to pay for this plan. And I think that and I'll get back to the drug stuff in a second, because I think that's what we really want to address. But I will say that on the Ottawa climate change plan, the City of Ottawa climate change plan, there's a belief, or a hope, if you will, that other levels of government are going to come in and contribute the bulk of the money through grants. But as I was telling a group last night, that's never going to happen. Never, in capital letters, because if you look at the per capita cost of climate of this particular plan in Ottawa, you're talking $60,000 roughly per person, per man, woman, and child. Now take that and use that as your base level across the country. And I think the number came out to something like $250 billion when we were looking at this. There just isn't enough money to do this. It's a pipe dream. So the money's not there, and the money's not being spent.
Look,
But let's go back to the drug issue, okay? Forget about the $60 billion. If we could spend a fraction of that providing treatment for people. And I will say this also, okay? Um, I, almost, I don't know. I'd have to think about it, but one wonders whether or not we're actually helping people by saying, well, if you don't want treatment, then we're just going to let it go. I'm not entirely sure that it's the right thing to do to say to decriminalize the possession and use of recreational drugs. I would probably be more in favor, and I'm just spitballing here a little bit, but I'd probably be more in favor, and I think it would be more effective for us to have some kind of a not a jail type of thing, but a thing where if you are an addict, and you are using and you are arrested for simple possession, I don't want to see people get a criminal record, but there has to be some, I think, form of incarceration, which is not necessarily criminal per se, but where we have some sort of compulsory treatment program.
Well, they had that.
Okay.
Earth Rapids and Cedar Springs.
Well, those were jails.
Yeah,
And
they weren't jails in the sense of like Kingston Pen. They were
no,
places where you were. I shudder at the word incarcerated, but let's call it incarcerated just means confined. So you were confined within these places because you did not have the mental wherewithal to look after yourself and take the medication that kept you sane, safe, and sober.
oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's what I mean by that.
but
That
I'm
I don't
talking
have
about
any problem with that.
what I'm talking about. People who are heroin addicts, fentanyl addicts is now one of the big ones. Coke addicts, etc., where they actually have a real problem. They're non-functional, and you arrest them, but what are you going to do? You don't. I don't want to put these people in jail, and I certainly don't want to have them go through life with a criminal record with the consequences that they have of having a criminal record. On the other hand, you still want to find some way um, of how do I put it, pressuring or forcing some degree of treatment. Now, experts will come back and say, listen, compulsory treatment doesn't work. You have to want it. And I get that. That is a very real issue. Um, but I think that if you put a person into an environment where uh, they don't have a choice but to sober up and clean up, even if it's for 30 days, and to have some kind of therapy, that some people are going to go through that, and they're going to make it, and the people who go through it and don't make it, and they go back out on the street and they pick up where they left off in terms of their drug abuse, um, well, send them back again over and over and over again.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't have any problem with any of those
the
things.
point I'm making is that you're no further behind, and in fact, you're further ahead because you know that a certain percentage of people are actually going to benefit greatly from a program like this. So, as I say, I'm just spitballing. I haven't really thought it through that much. What I do know is that what we're doing now doesn't work, and the worst thing about what we're doing now is it's we're normalizing the drug use. We're I wish that our leaders were not so afraid that they of basically getting up on their soapbox and saying this is wrong. Okay, using these drugs is wrong, pure and simple, plainly. I don't know why we're afraid to say that. And anyway,
Well, people like to they don't want to offend potential voters, especially like when you're running for office. Uh,
well,
if you take a clear stand, you're going to have people. Uh, that's why politicians are nebulous in general. You have there. It's not common to find a politician who is willing to take the heat for what they say. They want to be able to slide backwards, and they're like Imagine roller skates, multi-directional roller skates or casters you put on your couch. Give them a push in any direction you want to, and that's well the way which way they will go. It's because they want to get elected. They are in it to get into a career where it's demanding. Excuse me. It's demanding work. I'm not saying that politicians don't work, but if you can last 2 or 3 terms as a politician today, you're pretty much set for life because you develop networking skills, you've developed contacts within private sector that will take you on when your career is done. Uh, for however long you want to, when you're ready to bow out of politics. So it's setting up your lifestyle, and they don't want to risk that. So you have to find a very unique individual who doesn't care about those things, who remembers that people, when they run for public office, they are serving the public. It's not the other way around. Or as I like to say, it's public service, not public service. And that's the big difference. So if you can find people like that, and I think you're one
Well,
of them.
I
So,
think they're out there, Nick.
well, I
And you
know they
know,
are. I'm looking at one.
I don't think I think on this subject particularly, I think that it's a mistake for us to look to the government as particularly in the healthcare sector. I think it's a huge mistake for us to allow the addiction treatment and counseling sector, if I could use that term, to fall under the jurisdiction of the provincial health ministry, because then you're stuck with all kinds of funding problems and jurisdictional problems and protocol and process problems and bureaucratic problems, etc. I actually think that the best way to proceed on the addiction front is 100% private, and I would be willing, and I'm saying this not theoretically but as a practical matter. I would love to, if I found myself in a position to do it, to use whatever influence that I would have in the political realm to bring community leaders together, particularly corporate leaders, and they're out there, people with money, to say, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually spend some money putting together a private addiction center. And I know that there's some work has been done in this area already. The late Dave Smith was well known for having worked hard on building a treatment center for addictions here in the National Capital area. But I think that there's a lot of people out there, and you could expand it. And if you had some political oomph, if you will, behind it, I think that would certainly kick in a few more doors in terms of getting corporate sponsorship for that kind of thing. So I do believe that we're badly underserving and misserving the addiction community. Again, if I can use that term, by
Group, sure, go ahead.
by simply focusing on what has come to be known as harm reduction, handing out clean needles, or providing them with an environment, a place where they can inject themselves, and there's a nurse there or some medical staff there present, so that if and when they do overdose or have a bad reaction to the drugs that they're taking, that you have somebody that's going to be able to render immediate medical treatment. And let's not kid ourselves, okay, for our listeners and our viewers, that is what a safe injection site is. I remember, I'm conscious of time. Are we over time here? Do we have to go for a break?
Actually, we should have taken a break 6 minutes ago.
Okay, so let's take a break, and then maybe we can just go back to this. I have a very short story to tell about this.
All right. Well, before we go, I want to congratulate Craig Armstrong for standing up for throwing his hat in the ring for council down in Calabogie, even if Joseph doesn't know where it is. Congratulations, Craig. We wish you all the best. Go get them, buddy. All right. With that said, we'll take a break. We'll be back with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
All right, welcome back, folks. This is the final stretch for the Nick and Joe show. It's man, time sure flies when you're having fun.
Oh, the home stretch.
That's right. That's what that was. The home stretch. We're at home and we get the stretch. All right. Now you were saying you had an interesting little story to share.
Yeah,
with
very quickly on safe injection sites, Nick. So when they first opened the safe injection site in Vancouver, Insight it was called, and it had operated for I think about 18 months or thereabouts, and it was still being run under a special pilot project under the federal government. The federal government was able to suspend a certain provisions in the criminal code in order to have this experimental site. And we were doing some research on it. This is going back a number of years. And I was speaking to a few people and about the success stories, etc. About Insight, the success stories, and I was completely open-minded. I really wanted to hear what everybody had to say about it. And I was told at the time, they said, out of all of the interesting things about this, that out of 500 overdose cases that had occurred at Insight since it opened, they had not had one death, and they were very proud of that statistic. And I said, and it never even occurred to me. But when I heard that, I posed the question. That's very interesting, and it's a very laudable. But let me ask you a question: how is it that you have 500 overdoses at a safe injection site? And the answer to that was, well, we don't supply the drugs. And even a person who's engaged in policy and political and politics and stuff, I didn't even know that. So here they were, and this is how these safe injection sites work: is that you go there, you get the drugs, however you get the drugs, and then you go to this place and you inject yourself with the drugs that you've gotten illegally. So this led to a whole bunch of other questions, and that was, well, how is it then that you're saying that crime had gone down? Because that was the argument, that in the safe injection site area, crime statistics showed that drug-related crime had gone down significantly. So we started to look into this a little bit further, and discovered that just prior to the opening of Insight, the Vancouver police had an anti-drug program running, and so there had been a spike in drug-related arrests, and then that program stopped when Insight opened, and so the number of arrests went down, and of course that shows up as a drop in the crime statistics, right? But it doesn't mean that there's a drop in the crime. It just means that there's a drop in the number of arrests and charges that are made. So, and coupled with the fact that now police, instead of laying charges, when they pick somebody up and they'd say, okay, well, we're going to take you to the safe injection site and drop you off there, So there was a general reduction in the charges that were laid, the number of charges, but there was never a reduction in the number of crimes that were committed, because by definition, if you went to the safe injection site to inject yourself, you had to have committed a crime in order to obtain those drugs. So there was never all of the talk about statistics going down was true, but it didn't mean that crime was actually reduced. It was just the statistics. And just one last little point on this, okay? The authors of the study that was being cited by Insight organizers in support of their argument that crime statistics that crime had gone down. When they were saying this, they were saying, well, and here's the evidence, read this study. So I did something that most politicians and a lot of policy people don't do these days, because they're a little bit lazy, is I actually went and got the study. And I read through the study, and it's exactly what I explained. And this was not just me saying it. Actually, the authors of the study that Insight was citing in support of its argument that crime had gone down actually made the same observations that I just made to you. This is how I knew that Vancouver Police had this program. So the authors of the very study that Insight was using in support of their program was making the opposite argument to what Insight organizers were making, because what they were basically saying was, yeah, crime number, or the number of crimes committed, or the number of charges laid went down, but that doesn't mean the crime went down. And they caution in the body of their study that you can't make the argument that crime went down because of all of these other factors, variables that went into it. So it's a long way to get around to saying this. Okay, this is what these places are not really safe sites. All they do is there's no quality control on the drugs that are being used. There's no such thing as not committing crimes, because you have to commit crimes to be able to get the drugs in the first place, or to afford to buy the drugs in the first place. So crime doesn't actually go down. The only thing is that if you happen to have a bad reaction to the drugs that you're using while you're at the safe injection site, there are medical staff there in order to help you. That is the sole purpose of safe injection sites.
Well, I remember when they opened the one in Ottawa and the nightmare that was. And I remember a gentleman by the name of Chris, and I think his wife's name was Lisa. They started a group. He was living in just within a few blocks of the radio station. And I remember he contacted me and was talking about how he would go out with specialized forceps on it, let's call them pliers, for lack of a better term, where he would reach out so he didn't have to touch the needles, but they were discarded needles all over the place. We went for a tour of the area, and down beside the radio station is a little alley between that and the building and the building next to it. The alley was barely wide enough to fit a car. And we walked down there, and between the sidewalk and the end of the alley, which was less than 20 yards, if it was that much, that was the extent of it. We found 8 or 10 dirty needles just laying on the ground, ready for anybody to come along and step on. So he picked them up and put them in a special sharps container. Chris and Lisa Grinham, thank you, John. This is why we pay him so much money. And they founded Safer Ottawa. I got a good memory. It's just painfully short. And I want to give them credit for being the ones who, at the very least, forced the city to put up sharps containers and exchange on a one-for-one basis. You want a clean needle, you got to give us a dirty one. Because what they would do is they'd take handfuls of needles, use them, and just throw them on the ground. And there was at least one case because with those needles, there's everything from AIDS to hepatitis C to all kinds of bloodborne diseases that you
Right.
could possibly get.
And that's why they have the needle exchange, is to
Right.
avoid.
But there was a young girl, I'm going to say she's 10 or 12, where we went to her home and talked to her, and she had picked up or stepped on or somehow been pricked by one of these needles and now is taking drugs. I'm certain I haven't, I don't know what the status of what her status is now. I'm hoping she's just fine, but the fact that a 10 or 12 girls 10 or 12-year-old girl was put at risk by these shooting galleries, and that's what I call them, um, was horrendous on its face. And the previous chief of police, Vern White, was very much on Chris and Lisa's side, and didn't like these things, didn't like the organization, but his hands were tied because it was a federal thing, and they were going to do it within blocks of one of the heart of the tourist center of the city of Ottawa, the nation's capital. So, believe me, I'm well aware of the risk that these things pose. And I would tell you again, I would support Chris. He wanted to bring in a clinic very much like a place called Patriano, I think is what he called it, in Spain or in Europe somewhere, where they had like a 90% success rate at getting people clean and off the drugs and out the door again to become productive members of society. And he tried over and over again to get that form of and there just was no political will to do it. I don't know why. I think I do. I think I do know why. It's because there's a whole victim mentality and industry built around maintaining the status quo. People make a lot of money administering programs that don't work but are continuously funded. They're very good at bending government's ear and arm to get more funding to keep doing what they're doing. So there's a lot of six-figure salaries tagged to this. They don't care because ultimately you want to work yourself out of a job in a situation like that. You want to be able to say, okay, we've beat the problem. The reason for this organization's existence is no longer relevant. We can shut it down. And I think that a lot of people said, well, if we accomplish that, then we're out of work. What are we going to do? There goes my six-figure income. And that's what was propelling a lot of the resistance that Chris and Lisa faced.
Yeah, it's quite tragic, and I hope that if again, for people who don't know, that I'm actually running for municipal council here in Ottawa, so full disclosure, and I'm actually hoping that if I'm successful in that, I will have the opportunity to have some positive impact, both in the field of addiction treatment, but also in mental health. And I'm not talking here about spending tax dollars to do it. I think that there's a role to be played by politicians in bringing community leaders together and really finding a way to address some of these problems from an organic sort of community perspective, as opposed to simply the old, I think, largely discredited method of simply going to the government and creating these large bureaucratic institutions, and that in the end don't actually succeed in accomplishing the goals that they were set out to accomplish in the first place.
Yeah, and I guess this is part of what the deal, like, call it the Canadian swamp if you want. When Chris and Lisa stepped up and said, okay, what we're doing isn't working, and proposed a different solution, they ruffled a lot of feathers for the reasons that we have both just articulated. There's a very old school, or a clique, if you want, or a group or a cabal, call them what you want, of people who make a lot of money on misery. And they make a lot of money perpetuating the myth that this is the only way it can be done and government is the only agency to do it. And that's why I completely support both them and you and your attitude about how to beat this, because I think if you approach a private sector entity, there's a vested interest, especially like look at some of the places downtown that are negatively affected. And by downtown, I'm talking about the city of Ottawa, or let's take it to Vancouver too, okay, or any city that has these shooting galleries that are negatively affected. There is a vested interest in trying to help these people get off the streets rather than just push them down the street with a broom and make them somebody else's problem, which is also a very old tactic that doesn't work. It's like live trapping a bear. You pick it up from one place, put it to another, and you just created a problem for your neighbor. And that's not how we should be solving things. So the same thing here. You have this broom mentality that said, just keep on walking, kid. Don't stop because, we don't want you around. The attitude should be, I want to reach out. I want to help you. I want to get you, back on your feet so you can
Yeah,
restore the dignity of your own life again.
yeah,
Because,
and I think it's worth mentioning as well. That you're sort of citing the almost the enlightened self-interest argument when you go to community leaders or business leaders in some of these neighborhoods that are affected negatively by large numbers of people wandering around who are using and are addicted to drugs, and that certainly is an important factor, and it's a community, a business community that I think, as you say, would be interested perhaps in doing something about this stuff. But I really want to say that, my experience is that there are a lot of business people out there, people who've been very successful in their lives, who if they were approached, I think with a viable plan, that could be convinced to cough up some money and fund some really decent privately run programs in order to help people in the community, simply because it's the right thing to do. There's this idea of corporate of heads of corporations not caring, and just being greedy and not wanting to give back to their communities and that. But that's just not my experience. Sure, it happens. It happens in every sector of society that there are miserly people and greedy people. But my experience of people who've been successful is that generally they want to give back to their communities, and if they're not giving back, it's largely because they don't want to see their money wasted. And But look at the kind of money that goes into donations to hospitals. Unfortunately, in Ontario anyway, you could give millions of dollars to a hospital to build a building, but you can't give money to a hospital to hire medical staff
yeah, go figure.
because it's not legal. Okay, I mean it's such a crazy situation, right? I mean, if I was king for the day, and somebody said, "What would you do about healthcare?" I mean, I don't have answers to everything in healthcare, but surely to goodness, the first thing that we can do is change the law so that a hospital can actually use the donations that it raises, the money that it raises in private donations, for frontline medical care. Okay, but right now the way it is, you can't do that. It's not legal. So when you give a donation to your local hospital in Ontario, that money is not used to hire doctors or nurses. It might be used to buy new equipment if you need the equipment, but we don't need more equipment. Well, maybe we do need more equipment. I shouldn't be so cavalier. But what we really need doctors and nurses. And But somebody who's wealthy who wants to give money to the hospital and does give money to the hospital, they can't use the hospitals cannot use that money to hire medical staff. So it all goes into building buildings, or it goes into purchasing equipment.
Well, what's the point of
or it goes into, the big one is it goes into research.
what's the point of building a building if there's nobody to fill it? Like if you don't have any staff for
Well,
it, or
go figure. I mean, private businesses, philanthropists have given a lot of money over the years to hospitals like here in Ottawa, like the Civic Hospital, built a brand new, and we're going back a few years now, of course, but at the time, of course, it was a brand new, state of the art, modern emergency facility. Okay, and it's still there, and it's still pretty modern. It's still pretty good in that, but you don't have the staff.
well, that's my point.
And so, if you went back to some of these people these philanthropists, and you said to them, hiring staff is more important than painting the walls, they would get that. They'd say, yeah, let's hire 10 emergency room nurses, or 10 ICU nurses, or whatever. Okay,
Or a couple of ICU doctors. Yeah.
or some ICU doctors. Okay, but unfortunately, in our lust for being able to give ourselves the pat on the back and say, well, we don't have private money in healthcare. God forbid, perish the thought that we would want to find private money to help us to fund. And the funny thing here, Nick, is, and I'm conscious of our time as well here too, but I can't let the occasion pass without making the observation that a simple change in the law like this has nothing to do with creating private health care. You could still have the system, with all of its problems and all of its flaws, can continue to exist, but you allow private donations to go to actually paying for the hiring and regular payment, paying the salaries of frontline medical professionals. You don't have to change the system. You don't have to have a hybrid system, two-tier, private. It doesn't have to be a private system.
Yeah. Look, you're not getting any argument out of me. I mean, these are all very common sense kind of things. You could also change the law that says you can't have a separate MRI clinic next to a hospital, so people get MRIs the day they need them rather than waiting weeks. There's all kinds of little things, little adjustments, if I can call it that you could make. And that would be a whole show in and of itself. And unfortunately, we don't have time for that, because guess what? We are out of time for the show. It's been 2 fantastic hours. The chat room, we keep seeing new faces all the time in the chat room, and I'm encouraged by that. I like the fact that we now have Wade, I think, is from Saskatchewan. So we're seeing more and more people join the chat room. Who knows where they're listening from? But I'm encouraged by that. So keep spreading the word out there, folks. Let people know that the show is available, and that we don't eat kittens for breakfast. We're pretty nice people. We wait and serve them up at lunch.
Yeah, and Nick, let me do this. This is not an election plug, because a lot of people, most of the people out there that are watching our show and listening to our show, can't actually vote on our election. But I do have a website, and I do want people to go to it, regardless of where you are in the country, and maybe sign up to get for emails, because these are important issues to talk about, irrespective of the election campaign or anything like that. And at some point in time, there's going to be a post-election, and I really want to communicate with people. So let me just give my website address, if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
It's www.josephbenami, all one word, .ca. So that's JOSEPBENAMI.ca, josephbenami.ca. Go to the website and sign up for some emails. And there you go, John. Thank you very much for posting that. And as I said, it's an election website, but I want people to sign up anyway, because I'd love to stay in touch with people on some of these issues, irrespective of whatever the results are in the election.
And I can tell you from firsthand experience, he's got some amazing videos talking about what he wants to do and why he wants to do it.
Well, a few, and more to come.
Yeah, that I'm sure. All right, folks, that does wrap it up for us tonight. It's been a great show. We've certainly enjoyed your participation in any fashion.
Absolutely.
Spread the word, let people know, and let's grow this thing so that it reaches more and more people. All right. In the meantime, we'll see you all again next week. And for Joseph and I will bid you good night. Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.